Welcome to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco, bringing you interviews with industry experts and regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews in 60 days, guaranteed. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to introduce my guest today, Laura Neff. Laura is an organizational transformation and leadership development coach with Dorrier Underwood, a consulting firm that empowers leaders to envision a future and then achieve it. Laura is a successful career changer. She worked her way up at Bank of America from administrative assistant to leading internal communications for a technology and operations business unit. From there, she tested the entrepreneurial waters, founding a corporate communications consulting practice, co-founding a vegan prepared food delivery service, and finally, establishing her own coaching practice, supporting emerging leaders. After 16 years as a business owner, Laura made the decision in 2016 to test the job search waters and return in some capacity to corporate America. So, Laura, a lot of my clients are career changers like you. You have lived through it and lived to tell the tale, so I'm excited to hear your story. So, Laura, can you give us a quick overview of your career history as you see it?
Absolutely. The most succinct way of saying it is that I spent my first 10 or so years in the corporate world, as you mentioned in the introduction, primarily in banking and, like you said, working my way up from entry level to vice president position. And then there were about 5 years in the middle where I was stretching my wings and learning about the world and myself and trying on different entrepreneurial endeavors to see what fit. And then for the next 10 years after that, I was in private practice as a leadership coach, and also in the midst of that started the food service business that you mentioned. And now I am just about almost a year and a half into something right in the middle, which is working for a small consulting firm that is very much its own small business. We were started by two women actually, 30 years ago. We only have 10 employees, and we consult to the corporate organization. So it's right in the middle. It's kind of the perfect place for me to land, given my background.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. So, Laura, what propelled you to make your most recent career pivot 18 months ago?
The most recent pivot was prompted by an examination of the decade I had spent as an entrepreneur in my private coaching practice. That reflection on that decade, so it was my 10-year mark in my business. And my initial reflection was all just covered with all the amazing things that had happened and the incredible people I had met and the change and transformation I'd been really honored to be a part of in a lot of people's lives and careers, and the freedom that it had afforded me, and lots of great stuff upon reflection. And then at some point I thought, if I'm looking at the bright side of the past 10 years, I also need to be fair to myself and really take a hard look at what has been challenging through this journey. Like, is there anything that's been consistently challenging or draining or stressful, and just to give it a fair look. And so the two primary things I saw were that, and it was just a moment of kind of being honest with myself, was that for 10 years, I had had a really successful coaching practice and experience with that whole world, and there had always been financial, an undercurrent of financial anxiety. And it was just the not knowing, the unpredictability of my income stream. 1 month might be amazing, but it didn't mean that 2 months down the road I could look and see.
Not a steady paycheck, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there was that. And, it's neither good nor bad. It was just a looking and a kind of confronting that. And then the second thing was that one of the things that I loved the most about my corporate career was having a really significant experience of team and belonging, and getting with a group of really diverse, really smart people and rolling up our sleeves to solve a problem collectively that, no one of us could have solved alone. And I had been on lots of different teams and a part of lots of different efforts, and I built a whole company, my food company, with an amazing internal culture, but it just somehow had not been able to replicate that deeper sense of connection, being a part of a long-term team. So those two things had me think, life is good, my business is going well, I'm fine, and I wonder what I could do in an organization now with this kind of odd bag of tricks that I have that I'm carrying around me. So that's what that's what prompted me to see what was out there and what I might create next.
Well, and that's wonderful because a lot of people don't take the time to do that career reflection, or they don't know how to figure out what the next step in their path needs to be. So once you knew what the next step would be, what steps did you take to make that change?
It was really a two-pronged path, or maybe three. I'll say three. One was getting my ducks in a row in terms of my resume and making sure my LinkedIn profile was up to date and matched my resume. And that's when I found you, thankfully.
Yeah.
And then the second prong was to really start applying, start sending out applications, filling out applications, sending my resume, getting on the internet and just using all the resources I could, looking on the LinkedIn job board, just getting my brain in the game and taking action to start sending things out. And then the third prong, which is the one that I would advise to people that they not skip, is that I started getting out in the community, going to events in the circles that I was exploring getting back into. So, for example, there was a professional group for internal strategic communications that I had been a part of 15 years prior, and literally had not been to one of their meetings in 10 or 15 years. And so I went to one of their monthly meetings, and just to see, is this, I want to go hang out with these people and see if this is a world I really want to get back into, and just be in the space of these people and feel what I feel like in that group, and is this a place I could belong again, want to belong again, could see that I could add value to. And what I discovered was that where I really lit up was connecting with the speaker at that meeting. He was a guy who had a boutique consulting firm on his own, and he was passionate about what he was doing. He was excited. So we met for coffee, and we had coffee for 2 hours, and by the end of the conversation, he was saying, would you ever consider coming to do some contract work with my firm? And it was just such an alive place. And so when I tell people about that part, and that happened multiple times, which eventually one of those times also was meeting the woman that started the firm that I'm working for now. And when I tell people about that part of the process, I was like, I was sending in applications and doing all that, which was great. It was important to do. And ultimately, what led me to where I am is that I followed the bright light. I followed the bright lights that woke me up and, kind of went after those while I was going through the traditional path of sending my resume in, online boards and stuff like that.
Yes, it's targeted networking. That's brilliant.
Can I add to that? I would say targeted networking, but I could have stayed in the conversations in the circles of the people in the group in that meeting that I just told you about, and that would have been targeted networking, but it wasn't lighting me up. Those circles and conversations.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Whereas targeted networking, kind of when I pivoted and looked, was who am I in this room? Who am I most excited to talk about? It was that guy up on this. And so it's all targeted networking, but the piece that was missing for me with first scenario was the aliveness, that sense of excitement and aliveness.
Following the light. No, that's wonderful. What would you say what was your biggest challenge during this process?
Let me think about that for a second. Well, it's related, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I would say keeping myself on the path that was lighting me up and trusting that there was something good at the end of it, and not feeling the thing I need to do is just send my resume in to all these open jobs, and whoever raises their hand and says, we want you, that's who I have to go with.
Mm-hmm.
Because that could have led to a great position with great financial security and a team and all that, but would the place and the work and the way I was giving myself to the world in that way have really lit me up from the inside out? Maybe, maybe not. So I think disciplining myself to really trust that the brightest path that has me on it and excited is going to yield beautiful results, and trust that, even if it didn't look like I thought it was.
How would you say that you structured your job search on a daily, weekly, monthly basis in order to maintain that discipline?
Well, I would say that I am a semi-structured person, so I didn't have specific events in my calendar to remind me, which I could have done, which could have been a good idea in hindsight. But I did a couple things. One, and maybe the most important thing actually, was that I started opening my mouth and telling people what I was doing. So luckily I wasn't in a position where I had to find a job. It was purely optional. But so in light of that, it was really helpful and motivational to me to have other people in my life know that I was exploring the possibility of going back to work for somebody else. And I felt like that kept me accountable. And also, because I knew they would ask the next time I saw them or talked to them, then the other thing was that actually was what ended up leading me to the conversation that led to other conversations, which led to my position that I'm in now. So I had a breakfast with a friend who, on paper, didn't seem like anybody who would have anything really a role to play in my job search. But because I told her what I was doing, she literally just like kind of got this funny look on her face. And she said, "Have you ever heard of a company called Dorrier Underwood?" And without that, I never would have.
Interesting. So you never know who you know is the point that I'm taking away from that.
Yep. Yeah. And then the other, I would say the other, quote unquote discipline things that I did was every day or two, I would scan the job boards. I was looking for, kind of staying in the conversation, so to speak, of who was looking for what kind of person for what roles, who needed whom. And so I was keeping my eye on the LinkedIn job boards and other places on the web, some of which you pointed me to. And then just, doing the work of every couple of days, making sure I was sending out a resume or filling out an application or setting up a conversation or a coffee date or something like that.
Well, since you had a three-pronged approach to this, what surprised you most about this journey?
I would say for me, what surprised me the most was the thing about following the bright light. And, I think I went into it because I had my own business and I was an entrepreneur. I went into it unknowingly with a mindset of this is going to be either or. Either nothing really pans out and I stay the course that I'm on, which was fine, or I'm going to be back in the corporate world. I'm going to be full on, 9 to 5 suits every day, whatever. Or 8 to 6 or whatever that looked like, working uptown probably.
Right.
And then when I started following the bright lights, those conversations had me realize there's this whole middle place that's called, working for a smaller firm and going into corporate, applying my abilities and skills and backgrounds there while still being in the world of small business, which I love. So
right, you found that perfect hybrid. Instead of an either or an or, you got an and.
Yes, exactly. So
that's wonderful.
Yep, it was the best of both worlds, literally.
So I think the next question I was going to ask you is, what advice would you give someone looking to make a jump? And it sounds to me that, follow that light.
Yeah, just
you don't know where it's going to lead you.
Yeah, I would say, it might sound a little bit woo-woo, but I would say, reading job descriptions, when you're talking to people about open positions, when you're in the middle of an interview or a conversation, any part of this process, just like keep an eye on how you feel in the midst of all the various parts and pieces. There were plenty of jobs I applied for that if I had to ascribe a color to those jobs and that experience, it would be gray. I did the stuff, I sent it in, I attached all the right attachments, and it just was like, But I could have done the jobs in my sleep, and then I would have these conversations over coffee through these serendipitous routes, and I would end up in front of this random person I never would have met otherwise, and, I couldn't shut up, and it was 2 hours later, and we were saying to each other, gosh, I wish we had all day. So follow that.
That's great advice. Yeah, that's wonderful. So fun question. What is something that you think might surprise people about you?
Oh, goodness. Well, this is the first thing that comes to mind, so I'm just going to be really transparent. So I work from home a good bit of the time, which was one of my non-negotiables. I wanted the ability to
You negotiated that. That's brilliant.
Yes. And one of the best ways that I take a break between calls is I go outside and I let our chickens out into the yard and I collect eggs from the nest. And it's just my moment in nature when I just kind of calm myself, get out in the sun, shake off, all the web pages and the calls and the meetings, and I just go outside and I take care of my little chickens and I collect eggs.
And then you get farm fresh eggs. Oh, I love that.
My little brain break in the middle of the day.
That's perfect. No, but those brain breaks are important. That's very smart. So what's next for you? Where do you think this light is going to take you next, if you were to guess?
What's next for me is staying where I am for a little while, which is, in entrepreneurial past, although I had my coaching practice for 10 years, there was a lot of diversity in that 10 years and, working with different kinds of people and different other coaches in their programs and being faculty on different things, and a lot of change throughout that 10 years, even though it was all kind of in the same world. And so it's a bit of a radical move for me to stay put.
So the change for you is staying put, yeah.
Yes, and it's getting really, really rich, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm growing personally and professionally, and so that's what's next is staying put and continuing the journey right where I am.
Gosh, well, Laura, thank you so much. I think your advice is spot on, and I hope it makes an impact on someone who's in the same boat, because I know there's a lot of people out there just trying to figure out how to take that next step and where to go from there. So I appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will talk soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's SCIM online readers, hiring and decision makers, go to www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.